Hello and welcome to your guide to closing. This is the absolute best. You've gotten to the end of the line. You've sold your house. You're at closing date. And today, your guide is Tiff. Tiff, thanks for being here.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Awesome. So Tiff is going to guide us through the end of this process. But first, Tiff, so we can get to know you a little bit, if you were a neighborhood, any neighborhood anywhere in the world or in Atlanta, what would be your spirit neighborhood?
I think I'm going to have to say my neighborhood now, Cabbagetown.
That's when you know you're in the right place, when it's your own neighborhood. Why would Cabbagetown be your spirit neighborhood?
It's just kind of a fun, little quirky neighborhood. Chomp and Stomp is our festival. I love bluegrass and chili, so
yep.
I think I'm in the right place.
I think you're in the right place too. I love that. Awesome. All right. So we're at the very end of our guide to selling a house, and we're almost to the closing table, which is awesome. So let's start with the buyer does their final walkthrough. They're headed to closing. What are some of the things that the seller needs to do in preparation for the closing in relationship to their house?
Yeah, for sure. So, the biggest thing on the buyer side when they're doing the walkthrough is just to make sure that the house is in good shape. When they went under contract, there's not a tree on the house or a hole in the wall. So, biggest thing is, leave it broom swept, obviously. Any huge holes that you have, patch those up. If you think about how would you want to come into a house that you just bought, I think that's a pretty good guide for what should I do?
Yes, I think that's a great guide. What about getting your stuff out? And that means both your actual things you're planning to take with you, but also definitely had disagreements over the years about people took a fridge or didn't take something. What do they need to do from that standpoint as far as actually getting all out of the house?
Yeah, for sure. Well, anything that you had checked on that seller's property disclosure, you definitely want to make sure that stays. And then anything that's not checked really needs to go with you. Unless last minute you had hey, I really don't want to take this grill, Mr. Buyer, do you want to take it? But yeah, definitely make sure that you've had that conversation. But if it's not checked, it's got to go.
Yeah, and only if you've had the conversation, because you may think you're doing the buyer a favor, but you may not be actually doing the buyer a favor.
Right. Buyer doesn't want to come in and then automatically, have to call college hunks hauling junk, That's just an extra expense on them. So anything that's not checked, got to go.
Awesome. So you've got the stuff out that you're supposed to have out. You've left the stuff you're supposed to leave. Now you're going to the attorney's office. What is closing like for a seller?
Yeah, sure. So the closing for a seller is actually pretty easy. The buyer's got all the signing to do. You've got a couple pages, but just sit there quietly. Make sure you check over your closing statement. So seller side, it's pretty easy. Show up with your keys. You've got garage door openers, bring those.
Yep.
Anything like that. If it's a condo, mailbox keys. So yeah, just be ready to kind of turn over possession. But as far as signing, there's just a couple pages and then you're good to go.
What about on the numbers standpoint? Now, obviously you're going to get these numbers before you show up that day. But over the years, I've gotten a lot of questions around mortgage payoff and escrow accounts. Can you kind of explain to everybody how their numbers work so that they won't be surprised if the numbers don't match what they're thinking?
Yeah, for sure. So, they do on the payoff side, they do tend to collect a little bit more because, you've got a couple of days of interest. Want to make sure they're not asking you for more money after closing. So the attorney will collect a little bit more so that when they go to do your payoff, if you have a balance that they can send you back, they're going to send you that. And then as far as escrow, that's not something that you immediately get at closing. The bank has to actually give you a check because they're waiting for that payoff first. And then they can disperse funds from your escrow. Yeah,
that's great info because, a lot of times people think, hey, the payoff is higher and that's because of those extra days of interest you mentioned. Yep. And then they're like, well, I got sometimes thousands of dollars in this escrow account. Why am I not getting it? And it's because the loan's not actually paid off when you're sitting there at the closing table. So the seller then signs the docs, the buyer signs the docs. Do you get your money at that time? Is this the end? It's all over?
Yeah, pretty much. If you're getting a wire, the attorney's going to wire the money. It'll be there in a few hours. If you're getting a check, I probably wouldn't want to carry around a check that large in some cases. But yeah, I mean, they're going to cut you a check at the closing table and you walk away with a little money in your pocket.
Definitely. Hopefully a lot of money in your pocket. Does the seller have any responsibilities after closing?
No, I mean, once the documents are signed, it's the buyer's home now. You walk
Which is
away,
kind of awesome.
Yeah, the tree falls on the house 30 minutes after you guys walk out of there. Buyer has insurance. So
buyer's insurance is in effect. And that brings up another good point, because I mean, the seller does want to make sure that they've canceled everything, right? When should they do that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's courteous to, especially water, because like water can be a big thing. And if they come and cut off the water, it can take a family, 3 to 5 days to get it turned back on. So I would say leave the water on for about 5 to 7 days, just to give them a little time to go down there, turn in their application, stuff like that. As far as, I mean, cable, you're going to cut yourself. That's fine. Power, leave on through closing. That's pretty easy for them to switch over. They can just do it online or a quick phone call. So most things I would say, closing day or a day or two after, but water is the big one that you kind of want to give a little bit more of a buffer.
Yeah, that's really great, because man, it can be so tough for the buyer. If you show up, there's no water, it takes a couple of days to get on.
Yep.
And so seller is leaving with their check. They've left the house in the condition the buyer expects. We've got the utilities on through closing. Now they're actually done, on to the next place. So if you were to say, looking at, this end of the process and closing date, what's the one, I don't know if secret's the word, but one secret or most important thing for the seller to ensure a successful and enjoyable closing?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just leaving the house as it was when they were there, right? And just leaving it in good condition, making sure that there's nothing on your end that's going to hold it up. I think that's the best you can do.
I think that's great advice. I mean, there is nothing more disappointing for a buyer, and I've seen this happen more times than I wish I had, to come back to the house and the house is not either as they expected or in good condition. It is such a downer for the buyer. And then if anything needs to be done, it can be really hard to get agreement on both sides, because now the buyer's in a completely different mental space than they would have been had they showed up and you did what you did. So I think that's really great advice.
Yeah.
Appreciate that. Awesome. Well, you guys, you have made it to the end of this guide to selling a house. I hope that this has been helpful for you. And Tiff, thanks for being our guide here on the final one. We really appreciate you. We will see you guys on a future guide. And if you want to watch this again, feel free, run it back on rewind. And if you haven't seen our buyer guide, we've got that out as well. Feel free to take a look at that. Awesome. Thanks, Tiff.
Thanks.